Thank you, Kate. Well, the first thing I want to do is just thank you very much for joining us, because this says something a lot to LGBTQ people. They see all these people care about us and want to be supportive. So thank you very much for coming. The world is not so good now, especially for young LGBTQ kids and transgender people. Back when I was coming out in the 1970s, it was tough, but we thought it all was getting better with the marriage equality, and but now there are people, actually many states and religious groups that are pushing against that. Also, people thought that marriage equality gave us everything, but actually there are more than half the states actually say it's okay to discriminate. You can be fired or kicked off the bus or out of a restaurant. So we thought that was getting better because the EEOC and even the Supreme Court actually had a good decision, but actually the current administration is actually firing all the transgender people in the military. And they're also saying that transgender people, or maybe in some states under a certain age, can't have very important surgery. So it's a tough time for LGBTQ people, especially trans and kids. So thank you very much for coming, because it's tough. I know coming out, it's a real tough thing. It took me probably 15, 16 years. I didn't come out until 27. Very difficult, because religion was important to me. So I actually, I had a progressive parent, and my dad he wanted to be a minister, and they kicked him out because he was too progressive back then in the 50s. But because of that, I grew up in a progressive house, and still took me a while to figure this all out. And when I was in college, I got to know a lot of religious friends who were really believing the Bible literally. And I called my parents crying, I can't, it doesn't work in my head. And so I ended up going through the whole Bible when I was in college and writing all the things I didn't agree with. And then when I came out at 27, I also did a whole nother thing, and I have these here if anybody wants them. This one is the one I wrote when I came out. It's all the LGBTQ issues, and the book back then was this: Christianity, Social Tolerance, and Homosexuality. It helped me feel better so that I could come out. But now there's other good stuff, like Scott Martin's book on Clobber, and I really appreciate it. I've heard from so many of you who read it and found the book interesting, and so thanks for reading it. And even if you didn't read it, please feel free to participate in our discussion, because we're going to want to have a conversation with everybody, because last year when we had our talk, we had 5 people talk, and you all didn't get a chance to talk. And the other thing is, not only is it important to LGBTQ people, but also it's important for everybody to do this, I think, because it helps you figure out, how do you understand the Bible, and who is God, or whatever. And so at the end, maybe after we talk about each of the passages, we can talk about how do you interpret the Bible. So we have 4 people who are going to be talking, mostly from our Bible study group. Luckily, 2 of them have been to seminary. Kate and Darlene and I are going to talk. And then Tim. Where's Tim? Tim is also going to talk. So thank you very much for talking, Tim. The first one that I'm going to talk about is chapter 4. Now, we're just going to do chapters 4, 6, 8, and 10. Which are directly about the Clobber passages. But if you want to talk about the intervening chapters and how, what you think of Colby, he's coming here soon, please feel free to talk about anything. And even if you, as I said, if you didn't read it, still jump in. So on mine, I have the Sodom story in Genesis 13. And so I put my 2 questions into one. What did you know about the Sodom story before you read this book? And then did this book help you understand it in different ways and better ways? So that way, if you didn't read the book, you can still say what you thought about. What have you heard about the Sodom story, and how does that impact you? And what do you think? So looks like you have an idea. Thanks, Julie.
I never thought of it as being a hospitality story before. I've known that the Jewish people were very hospitable, but never put together that Sodom and Gomorrah was about hospitality. So I found that very interesting.
Yeah, there's lots of places in the Bible where it says, remember, you were practically slave servants in Egypt, so be good to your neighbors, be good to the people who come into your land, right? Thanks, Julie. Anybody else want to talk about before we read the book and after?
Reference to that. I agree with, oh, yes. I need an extra hand. That's what wives are for. I agree with Colby Martin that Genesis was not written with the goal of keeping a literal word-for-word account of the history of Israel. Marcus Borg says pretty much the same thing in his book, Reading the Bible Again for the First Time. Borg maintains that Old Testament stories are not always, and I quote, God's stories of the world's beginnings. Rather, they are ancient Israel's stories of the world's beginnings. I really like one of Colby's concluding short statements, and I quote, "It's time we close down the online message boards, throw away the picket signs, and shut up the bullhorns on the street corner, because those are the things that are truly abominable." Thank you. I'll stop right there.
Anybody else want to talk? I'll just add a couple points that I remember from reading this. Actually, I read it a year ago. But one way to interpret provisions of the Bible is to see what does the rest of the Bible say. And so I don't know if Colby mentions this, but in the books I've read, the Bible mentions the Sodom story. It refers back to Sodom and says, you know, it never mentions homosexuality as being the issue. It was they were not good people. They were surfeit of food and ate too much, and they weren't sharing, like as we talked about today. So it doesn't mention homosexuality. And the other thing I remember, and you don't usually see this in books, Colby didn't mention, but in another book of the Bible, it has a very similar situation, except they rape a woman. And the Jewish people then get really angry, and it was the Benjamite tribe, and they would say, let's go out and kill all the Benjamites. So they were still stereotyping, but they didn't stereotype all heterosexuals because, if you're heterosexual, well, I didn't do it. It's just those Benjaminites. And then after killing almost all the Benjamite tribe, they you see in the Bible, they rend their clothing and say, oh, that was terrible. We shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't stereotype. We need to love everybody. And it was a big mistake to do it. And it wasn't Benjamites. It was just those two people. So those are two of my memories of reading that. Anybody else? Chris, you want to join us here, in fact?
Well, the other thing was, is this one?
It's on.
Or, is it now? No. Okay. Okay. Anyway, the other thing that was mentioned about the Sodom story was that it was basically they wanted to rape the visitors, and that's not so much a act of sexual desire as of violence.
Yeah, it wasn't just homosexual. Is that you can, whether you're homosexual or heterosexual, you can rape people, and that's what's bad. You're not being very hospitable by raping people.
How can I top that? Anyway, on with the story. What I've found over the years is that the Bible has been used to proof text just about anything that you want. It really has nothing to do with the Bible. It's that you are not in my tribe, and I don't like you or trust you. And so I'll use anything to put a wall between us. and to use whatever power I might have to dominate you. And that's what we're working with. And it's not just about sexual preference. It could be, you name the subject. And so it's about helping another person listen, understand what I'm saying, and vice versa, and come to some kind of common ground, and then move on from there. And this is a very difficult subject to do that with. Very difficult, but there are a lot of other very difficult subjects as well.
Yeah, when I came out, one of the things I realized, I became a second-class citizen all of a sudden. I used to be the primary first-class citizen. And then all of a sudden I realized, oh, wow, blacks have had to deal with this too, and women. And I'm not the only one. There's a lot of people are being impacted. I think I saw a hand.
Okay.
It's working.
So your point was a really good one about putting up walls. And I thought one of the things that was very interesting was how surprised people were in responding to Pastor that he didn't have a relative, or he didn't have a very close personal connection to someone in the LGBTQIA plus community. And so part of it, though, is to me it feels like fear of loss of power, or fear of actually getting close to someone and standings that you've held so dear for so long, and that was what he expressed, were thrown up in the air, and you know, you basically, what do you grab onto?
I just wanted to piggyback on what Chris had said is further proof when they were offering his daughters out instead, which only gives more proof to the fact that, I mean, this was all about subjugation and making sure that these people were put into their place, made into the kind of subservient role. You know, it was not about the sexual act. It was about putting them where they should be. Right.
And again, from my observations, the major underlying feeling when we're talking about subjects like this is fear. And that's why there's such anger involved, whether we're talking about, again, sexual preference or where homeless people live in your county, which I deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, in fact, fear was the issue in Sodom. If you read before that story, Sodom had just lost a battle to some outsiders, and they were afraid these guys, whether they were angels maybe, were coming in to dominate Sodom. And in fact, you maybe remember a little bit before that, God is talking about wiping out Sodom. And Abraham or Lot gets them down to 50, down to 10, down to 5. Even with 5 people? So Sodom was nervous, and fear was an issue. So I don't know if you want to, are you ready for,
If you want me to, ready for the next part?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I got two microphones. Thank you. I'd like to read a statement here and then ask you to comment, okay? All right. Many theologians, including Marcus Borg in his book, The Heart of Christianity, and I've reasonably certain, although you're free to disagree, that Colby Martin, this also might be his stance, okay? The following. Now I have to read my writing. Okay, the Bible is a human product, and from now on I'm paraphrasing. Much of what we read in the scriptures comes from a particular community's understanding of God and God's requirements, and does not come from God. What do you respond if you want to? What do you think? I think I'm hearing that in Brian. I'm hearing it. Yeah, anybody else? We're singing the same song.
Brian's in Bible study too.
Pardon me?
And Brian's in in our Bible study group. So
Yes,
it's an
he is.
Advertisement for
For Bible study, advertisement. Okay, any comments from anybody? Am I preaching to the choir, as someone recently mentioned? I see lots of nodding heads.
I don't think I would universally agree with that. I mean, the reason that the Bible has had such impact in our world is a general belief that it was inspired by God.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the receivers of the inspiration may have not received it well, but if there was no God inspiration, then we wouldn't be bothering with this book.
Yeah.
I did not mean to say there is no God inspiration. I simply meant to point, I think I meant to point to the context and the particularity of a specific community. For example, the Levite, some think it was just for the Levite priests that this was written, but you make a good point. I want to add one more comment, then I may be quiet. Okay.
Moving on, can I speak to the other, this?
This does, but go ahead, I'll follow
Okay.
if I may. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that this is part of where, especially evangelical Christianity, tends to run into trouble because they don't study the Bible in terms of its original context, which it does appear Colby has done either since all of this internal struggle, or maybe he did have some of it in his studies. I'm not sure. But I do think that there is just a lot of reading the Bible as it is, English, and as even you saw in my sermon this morning, different translations address different things in the text. And some, the NRSV just kind of glosses over the fact that there's this silent word in there. And I'm like, how do you account for that? So when we do read it only in our own language, so we're not even looking at what the original language meant, and then we're taking it out of context. Because I do think that I'm sort of in between the two of you. I do think that your statement, I understand you meant that it wasn't like a blanket. But it is, I think it's contextual, and there are certain things that are applicable and certain things that were only applicable to that context. I think that the problem with Marcus Borg's statement, at least as you stated it, is that it can seem like a blanket thing, and discounts that God has inspired, and that this text has continued to be used by faith generations for decades, hundreds, thousands of years. So, well, not too long. Hopefully it's enduring if it's actually right.
Presence.
Yeah.
The living
I'll just
presence. May I make my comment, and then I'll be quiet. Okay. Maybe. I find it impossible to accept that the God whom we know in Jesus Christ is would ever say, "Man shall not lie with man; they will be put to death if they do." That is not the God that I know. I say that humbly. There's a whole lot I don't know, but that is not my experience of the living, loving, forgiving, joy-giving, life-giving presence of the living Christ. I'm done. I could not be for me. God could not have said those things in Leviticus.
I went to a conservative evangelical seminary, and half of what we were taught was to look into context.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, but the reason I'm saying that is that historical context, lingual context. Even with that, you can twist things around, turn them around any way you want. Not just with any piece of literature. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. Look what happens to our Constitution. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the things that what you just said reminded me is that one of the misinterpretations might be that abomination is in some Bibles, but in other Bibles it's ritually unclean or unnatural. Yeah. And the ritually unclean means when the Jewish people left Egypt, God said, I want you to be distinct and different, I'm choosing you to be different. And that can be interpreted negatively, but it could also be, I don't want you being like those Egyptians who treated you like slaves and did all these other things that aren't so good.
A holy people. God wanted the Israelites to be set apart, the definition of holy that I'm using, not like the Egyptians with their unseemly sexual practices and other things, and not like the Canaanites where they were going.
Yeah, in fact, we learned that in Torah study.
Yeah.
Kate's got a Torah study with a Jewish person who leads it, and that's been, and we are holy. There's the first line. Yeah, you are holy, yeah.
Look, I'm certainly no theologian, but I think Marcus Borg is very, very easy to.
It has to be closer to your mouth, too.
He's very easy to misquote, and I found that out having religious discussions, arguments with some of my more conservative family members, and I found that it's not a good idea for me to quote Marcus Borg unless I literally read what he says, because he chooses his words very carefully, and I just thought I'd throw that out, because we run into that. She and I run into that.
I'm curious, what do people think that it means to be holy?
Love your neighbor, follow the commandments, love God. The primary commandment, love God and love neighbor as yourself.
Isn't there a set-apartness part of it? So
People are watching online, I'm sure.
yeah, there's a concept that holy means you are set apart for God or for some purpose of God.
We're all made in God's image. Every single one of us is made in God's image. So to be holy is to try to be better at all times. Try to be kinder. Try to watch the words you speak, because they can hurt, and they're not meant to hurt necessarily. So being holy is trying to be more like Jesus, more like... And remember that we're all made in the image. Doesn't matter who we are. He doesn't make mistakes.
Do you feel like in that definition it's sort of like leaning into the image that we are made in a little bit more than perhaps leaning out of it? Is that a fair way of describing that?
It's aspirational through inspiration, I think. And that's the inspiration of God.
So, Julie, my conservative evangelical family would use the exact same words that you use, but mean something totally different by it. Going back to interpretation and understanding each other.
It's like saying help. If you say, help me, that may mean I want help with drying the dishes, or it may mean but if you say, help me, it means something totally different, and it's the same words. So the interpretation of words is...
I was just going to say, I think historically it means all of those things that you have all talked about. And the set apartness is in part because, at least in my understanding, and maybe my Jewish friends can correct me, but the Jewish people were set apart to be sort of the prototype in order that the world may also be saved. And then it is in God realizing that people are going to be people and we just can't do that ourselves that Jesus enters the scene. And so, there is an element of being set apart. I think for us, it also is like, which way are we following? Are we following the way of love, or are we following fear and hate? And so there is sort of a setting apart of that. Like, we're setting apart the ways that we are living in a way that maybe more models the ways that God and Jesus would act and be in the world.
Isn't there a set-apartness part of it? 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 Isn't there a set-apartness part of it
You're next if you want to do your part.
I'm just curious. All right, I'm just gonna say this is surprising to me that you all are this quiet. Usually, y'all are chatty Cathys, and so I'm just gonna open it up. And I mean, I do have some specific questions about this if we need them. But thoughts. What are your thoughts on this 8th chapter on Romans?
I just said that was tough.
Say more about why it's tough. Yeah. It's the 8th chapter of the book. It's the first chapter. Yes.
Yeah, it just, the way it was read and reading it in context were two different things. So I went back and reread what happened before and what happened after. I just thought that was the one that was most specifically anti-LGBTQIA and was, I've never taken the Bible that literally. So I'm not a literal reader of the Bible. And I think it's a great history book, divinely inspired. But that one hit me sort of as, ooh, that one I'm going to struggle with a little bit more. Not because I just.
Yeah, this is the toughest one. That's why I gave it to Kate.
I have a comment. Thank you. The clobber passage of Romans 1, 26, 27 is very, very severe and judgmental. In my opinion, it is in direct conflict with the teachings of Jesus, such as to love thy neighbor as thyself, and judge not that ye be not judged. Furthermore, Colby Martin is not convinced that this so-called clobber passage was, in fact, written by Paul. I have the same doubts. To me, this passage casts a confusing blemish on Paul's otherwise inspired writings. Again, I'll stop right there.
The thing that, I mean, this is always the passage that I had struggle with as well when I was looking through all of this. And what amazed me, what I loved about what Colby did with it was he showed I forget the actual book that he was referring to, but that, you know, in reference to what Brian was saying, that this was potentially just taken right out of a book at the time that Jews were using to show their separateness from everyone else. And when you look at the whole context of Romans 1 to Romans 2, and you realize that the Roman church that he was writing to was a split of Gentiles and Jews, and the Jews were out of Rome for 5 years and they were coming back, and this is what Paul was trying to unveil to them. It's like, oh my gosh, I read this in a totally different light. And that was what was very helpful to me, was that he was making this argument to say, look, Jews, this is the way you see Gentiles. And then he turns the tables on them at the beginning of chapter 2. And that was what was really enlightening to me.
Yeah, that was new for me too. That he was like trying to create an argument between the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians.
The other thing about this particular passage that I found interesting, Colby Martin had a very, I don't know, it's maybe one sentence in the entire book saying, and the word says homosexuals shouldn't even be in the book. You know, so I went to the Reconciling Works website and read all of the passages, but also found out about the movie, some of you may know it, 1946, but that's when the Revised Standard Version put in the word homosexual, and so to me, it's like grafting on, you know, in context in the 40s. I mean, you spoke about how difficult it was in the 70s. Well, you know, in that time, it's like who's in and who's out is really exemplified by, kind of doing a reinterpretation of the Bible.
Yeah, words matter, and because that word didn't exist 2,000 years ago.
I feel like when you say like that, who's in and who's out, like that's part of what surprised me so much about, like previously, years and years ago, about Romans 1, because Paul is in Peter's camp in Acts, where it's like, oh, why are we making Gentiles become Jewish people in order to be Christian? We should. And there's like an expansiveness and an inclusiveness in Paul's theology otherwise. And so it is this, and this is a text that a lot of people don't know what to do with, because I went back, I was curious, and I pulled off one of my Romans commentaries to see what the author of that commentary said about that text specifically. And in commentaries, these authors are looking at the Greek like word for word and dealing with the text in that way. And this author, it was just sort of like this, but this doesn't even make sense just reading this section on this verse, because on one hand, the author would say, oh yeah, it says that men shouldn't lay with men, blah, blah, blah. But then would say, but this doesn't say like all men, and it's not, so it was like both being super specific and then also being very general about it too. And I do think that this is part of what I mean about taking things and reading things in the book. So I had a professor named Mark Allen Powell, and a lot of his work, he's really well known by various folks, speaks often, but a lot of his stuff is about the narrative. Like when I took an exegetical class with him, he made us do some narrative work, and that meant, what does this text mean in the whole of the story that the author's writing? So don't just read this chapter, read everything around it. Like, what is the story? And I think that's what I appreciate about Colby's take on this, is because it's like, if you read chapter 1 and then you get to chapter 2, it's like, this does not jive. So I know that Holly brought her Bible. I am curious if anyone has a Bible either on their phone or in their laps. And so, Darlene, can you do me a favor? Can you read the clobber verses? It's 1, 26, and 27, I think.
Yeah, but use this. Thank you. For this reason, God gave them up to degrading passions. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural, and in the same way also the men, giving up natural intercourse with women, were consumed with passion for one another. Men committed shameless acts with men and received in their own persons the due penalty for their error.
The other thing that I'll say about this is the word unnatural, which of course you all read about. I don't remember which professor this was in my seminary days, but we talked an awful lot about how sometimes some of the things that were in the biblical witness, especially in the Old Testament text, Hebrew scriptures, were mostly for keeping people physically safe. So there's a lot of things, that have to do with hygiene in a way that is not just ritualistic, but also like, they didn't know about soap and washing your hands in the way that we do. I mean, they did wash their hands and they did wash, but like we know why that is effective because we have microscopes. They didn't. So like some of the stuff may just be things that were in the text to keep people safe at the time and were sort of in some ways kind of middle axioms, like they were not the end-all be-all, the eternal thing, but rather were useful in the day. And so some of that stuff we have, and the thing about that also has to do with sex and procreation. Nowadays we have IVF and we have all sorts of ways of folks producing kids that were not available to them at the time. And so when it comes to unnatural, it's more like, is this in service of procreation? Which then that begs the question, should all sex be in service of procreation? This was an argument that I had with one of my colleagues way back. This was, I think, probably the year of the ELCA voting to include LGBTQ in committed relationships, because that's the important designation there, clergy. And he was anti that because he was more conservative. Turns out he actually didn't want to really be in the ELCA, so he's not anymore, but that's a whole other story. But I'm like, you and your wife have sex, right? And like, you have it in order to not, like, and you do it for pleasure, not just to have kids. Like, that's the Catholic argument about why no birth control. But how many Catholics are using birth control. So anyway, when we get to the unnatural piece, that's what it means, is mostly in service to procreation. That may not be as applicable to us today. All right, so now Holly, can you read for me? Do you have it open to Romans? Can you get a microphone from somebody over there and read chapter 2, verses 1 through 3?
Therefore, you have no excuse, whoever you are, when you judge others. For in passing judgment on another, you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, are doing the very same things. You say, we know that God's judgment on those who do such things, is in accordance with the truth. Do you imagine, whoever you are, that when you judge those who do such things, and yet do them yourself, you will escape the judgment of God?
Thank you. Hearing those verses after chapter 1, does that change your opinion of what Darlene read?
It does. I was going to say something different. And in speaking with Ron's husband, Greg, once, I was trying to ferret out exactly what it meant to be bisexual or non-binary. And I said, I can understand being a woman attracted to a man attracted to a man, woman attracted to a woman. I said, but I don't understand how you can be attracted to both. How does that work? And Greg just went, I'm just wired differently. And it was so simple, but I thought, yeah, okay, just wired differently. Who wired us? God. So we are all wired differently in a lot of different ways. Some of us are very passive, some of us are very aggressive, some of us have fiery tempers. We're all wired different ways. And when he just said, I don't know, just wired differently, I thought, why was it so simple and I didn't see that? So I don't know that that's the answer, but it's made it so much easier for me. Just wired differently.
Yeah, so what's natural for one person is not natural for someone else.
All my life, one of my favorite stories in the Bible is, don't try to remove the speck from somebody else's eye until you've removed the log from your own. And then I can quote the wonderful prophet Oprah Winfrey, who wrote a wonderful article called, You Spot It, You Got It. And the article explains how sometimes the things that annoy you the most in other people are the things you do all the time and you're not aware.
That is just, while we're passing the mic to Cindy, that just as an aside, that is so true. The things that annoy me the most about my mom are definitely the traits that I have, that I got from her.
As we all become our mothers.
Yeah.
But
well,
fathers too. No discrimination there. I liked what you said about being wired differently, but with two youngsters, I also think in this day and age, it's being socialized differently, because I've talked to my daughters, and they said, you people now just like people for who that person is. So I'm attracted to this person because I love the traits in this person, and a lot of the norms around, but the only reason you can like the traits in this person is because they're of the opposite sex, were being eroded. Maybe not so much right now, but that was interesting to me that, that it's not, it doesn't, I think kids coming up, and that's, this whole, why are there so many more people who feel like they're gay? I think it's maybe there's so many more people who understand I can love who I'm attracted to, and it doesn't matter what sex they are. So I think it's wiring and socialization.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of that is absolutely true, and we also need to talk about gender when we talk about all of this. There's essentially two different tracks, going back to what, Karen, your sort of curiosity and wondering around all of this is. One is who we are attracted to, and then there's also the ways that we as a culture have gendered things and behaviors and the like, and how that has been unhelpful in some ways over, decades and hundreds of years. There's also the element of one person can be, so if you are born female and discern you're trans and become male, but you still like men, then it makes you a gay man, gay transgender man, because the two things are separate, sexual orientation and gender. And we're also forgetting about all the asexual folks who are sort of maybe more what Cindy is describing either asexual in terms of not having a romantic relationship or attraction or desire, but there's also asexual people who do have romantic relationships, but they are what we call ace forget that I've said that, but because I said ace and put it in the wrong, but anyway, but there are asexual people who are attracted to just people. It is I'm attracted to these traits in this person, and they have to know the person before they develop romantic attraction. It's not like they see someone on TV and lust after them. Instead, it's I have this attraction for people that I know and develop a relationship with, and it could be any gender. But it doesn't make them necessarily bisexual either, because it's I have to have a relationship, and whereas bisexual people are attracted to both those who present as male and those who present as female. So anyway, it's a lot, but I do think I appreciate the fact that we are culturally becoming more open and less rigid. Because also the other thing is men have been historically taught to stuff their feelings in. It's you men, you have feelings, so don't stuff them until they explode all over the rest of us, because you have just reached your limit. And women, we're taught to sacrifice ourselves for the sake of everyone else. And that's not healthy either, because it's at some point you have to say, I need this. So there's all these cultural things around gender that we have totally inhabited in a way that often can lead to some messy things. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
Yeah, and the argument has also been made that there really is no such thing as male or female, that we are all on a continuum, biologically, hormonally, genetically, and so we sociologically place a label, and that's what you were referring to. That's an artificial label. So most of us are in between on various aspects of connectivity to each other, and attraction.
So I just had a thought on what Kate was saying. A good number of you probably know, but our daughter is queer, non-binary, and bisexual. I'm pretty sure that changes. But yeah, better. But what I have learned is, so when they would date people, I would try to figure out what their birth gender is. This is in the beginning. And, I'd ask, creative questions to try to figure it out. And then one time I think I actually came out and asked, and they said, Mom, you're not supposed to ask that. And I'm like, okay. And they said, it really doesn't matter because, and it's kind of offensive, right? If you're trying to figure this out, because whatever pronouns they are using or however they are identifying, that's who they are, right? So that's how they are identifying themselves as a person. So it doesn't matter what their birth gender is or anything. So that just really helped me. And I was just talking to Jen about this, but and in my mind, I'm like, okay, they're right. Like so now I just don't even ask. I try not to even think about it. It's somebody that, even if it's a friend, right, that they talk about, and I used to wonder, like, I wonder if that's like their birth name, or is that now their new name? I forget all the terms, but anyway. So yeah, and what also helped me in the beginning when we had to start using different pronouns for them, they said, well, when I had my friend, started using they, them pronouns, I had to truly look at them and think of them as they, them, like as a non-binary person, like not look at them like, oh, this is a female that now I need to use these different pronouns, but like, or vice versa, like if it's a female trying to be a male, identifying as a male, you have to in your mind shift that this is a male, and then that kind of helps your whole mindset, right, to like use the right pronouns. Anyway.
And there's also a non-binary person in the Bible who is very, very famous. I don't know if you all know who I'm talking about, but Joseph. His father Jacob gives him this beautiful multicolored dress or robe. And so Joseph is pretty non-binary. He's not following, the male stereotype back then, and that's why his brothers were always mad at him, picking on him, and selling him off to slavery. And not only in the Bible, but then there's Jewish commentary on the Bible where they get in close, where he was wearing eye makeup and just it mentioned all these things about Joseph. It's like, oh wow, Joseph was non-binary. And that's really, really important to non-binary Christians who say they can see themselves in the Bible. And there are a couple other characters in the Bible, too, that are non-binary. Oh, and then I've talked with ministers, and maybe God is non-binary. Because, there's male aspects, female aspects of God, and non-binary and non-gen, Okay, next up, Tim.
So the last chapter that we were talking about just includes the passage in 1 Corinthians 6:9 and 1 Timothy 1:10. And the two biggest words that they use in there are malakos and arsenokoitai, which I'm sure you use in your regular language on a daily basis. But I guess starting out with just what is your history with these words? What have you heard in the past? What are your thoughts on their meanings from a discussion standpoint? So if anyone's looking back, I can, if the verses, if you want them again, it's 1 Corinthians 6:9 and 1 Timothy 1:10. And malakos, it has been interpreted in several ways, but soft, effeminate, and in some ways it's also been more of the female role in a sexual act has been proposed as well as an interpretation. Arsenokoitai historically has been, it's bringing together two words in Greek, bed and male. And realistic, from what I've read in a lot of ways, this could be one of the first, if not the first times anyone has used that word. But just to give you a little background on the two of them, and then I can talk a little bit more unless anyone has stuff to add.
Just with the first one, who you are, and gender identity, and gender fluidity, I think all of us have masculine and feminine characteristics, and that's not a bad thing. And maybe those characteristics change over time as we are given the opportunity and freedom to learn about them. because I mean it takes a while for us to explore our own identity, and so it, you know, the where someone is, you know, seeking out, you know, that identity. I think that, like that effeminate, you know, many of these terms can be pejorative if taken that way, and they don't have to be, you know, and I think that that's like, you know, certainly, you know, in elementary and junior high school, you know, you heard terms that are abhorrent, you know, that people were like picking on you just because you weren't, as a male, macho.
One of the things I read is, this is in a list of 7 or 8 things that you shouldn't do. Like you shouldn't rob and you shouldn't lie. And there's other lists where you should be kind and good and all. But in this list of 7 things, if one of them is the word homosexual, that's a status, whereas not something you're doing. You're not stealing, you're not being mean, you're not. And so I try to separate them and say, it should be something you're doing. It can't be interpreted as a status or effeminate. I wouldn't want to interpret that literally and say you shouldn't be effeminate. Kind of like what you were saying, that some men are and some women are not as effeminate. But I don't think that's an evil or something that you shouldn't be doing.
While we're at it, you know, it'd be great to thank Ron, wouldn't it? Or should we wait till the end? Maybe wait till the end, I guess. And Kate, too. Yeah. I find it fascinating that in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9, looky there, we have the word sodomites. Back to the misunderstanding, as I see it, of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Well, just really quickly, and I'll pass it over to Diane. I agree, but I actually, because of my understanding of that Sodom and Gomorrah story, find it helpful that it says sodomites, because in my head, I read people who are forcefully using violence against others, even sexually. But, I mean, it's better than some other translations that translate it as homosexual. So, anyway, I'll just say that, and then I'm going to pass it over to Diane.
I just want to say one quick thing that, or to drop into this conversation, that historically, Native American, I shouldn't say Native American, indigenous peoples did embrace that concept of fluidity, you know, historically. And then when Christianity was dropped onto them, that's when it became absolutely taboo to be of a fluid nature. And now that concept of fluidity is coming back in indigenous societies in several different forms. There's a wonderful book called The Manly Hearted Woman, that it's a novel, but it brings that forward about this woman who was a warrior. And it's a great read if anybody ever wants to take a look at it.
Yeah, the medicine man and the witch doctor, often in those African and indigenous peoples in the United States were, or before America, were often gay or trans. And that reminds me of another thing, going back to the Bible, a lot of people say Jesus never mentioned anything about gay stuff in the Bible. And that's true, he never mentioned anything negative, but some people would say he did say some positive things, and that's with respect to eunuchs. Jewish people way, way back in the past said, eunuchs, you can't enter the kingdom of God. But Jesus says there are eunuchs, and when he describes eunuchs, he mentions eunuchs made by God, eunuchs made by man, and eunuchs who are doing it to separate themselves for God. So that's priests, the last one. But the first one, eunuchs made by God, could be non-binary gender, people who are not standard gender. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that something you said, Kim, is the process that your brain goes through. And I struggled with this with my mother. My mother she always thought that my brother being gay was because she had done something wrong. It was all her fault, and that she would rather go to hell and be with my brother because that's where he was headed and so it was tragedy upon tragedy, and I could never get her to believe that Bill was who he was. I mean, he was not. But the process for me was also, I was always taught it was wrong, but as I saw my brother and the beauty in him and the artistic piece that he was able to do, and he was a great artist, and he was studying in Paris, a master's degree at the Louvre, I believe, to have a master's degree in art, and he was just full of love and nature, and you couldn't take the beauty in my brother and feel that somebody had caused him to be, but my father was a traveling salesman, my mother blamed herself. How do we help people that are blaming themselves for something and move? I failed. I mean, my mom died before I could ever convince her. And I'm sure she's seeing it now, but how do we help people that are in that situation? I don't know the answer.
One of the books that just came out, and this is the last section, and that what do you do? There's a lot of conservative evangelicals that just believe the Bible literally. And in fact, one is the guy who wrote this book, The Widening of God's Mercy. And I really liked it. This would be good for he's a conservative evangelical. He's not changing his negative understanding of Romans 1:26, but he says God changes. And so not all evangelicals can believe that too, but then he shows a couple places in the Bible where God changes. And so I have this faith or belief that, like the Pilgrims and the Puritans eventually became the UCC church. They became the UCC church. And so I have this faith that through time, the evangelicals are going to stop believing the Bible so literally. I think someone else.
This is just a really quick comment, and following what Julie said, this is trivial. I loved what you said, Julie. When I was a child, I observed that I wanted to be a boy, and there's a name for that, tomboy. I didn't want to wear dresses. I just wanted to be like the boys. Why? Because if you look around you, the boys got better treatment. The boys got more achievements. The boys were cool. And then when I hit junior high, I realized how attracted I was to boys, and I then reversed and figured, I have to take on female attributes like flatter the boys and not challenge the boy. That was what I was taught, but it didn't last long because I pretty much decided to become a strong woman and not, I got independent, and I studied anthropology, and when you realize how infinite's a word we throw around. There are infinite ways of behaving, infinite ways of believing, infinite combinations of testosterone or estrogen, infinite variety in human beings, and that's why diversity should be celebrated.
I was really appreciated Colby Martin's discussion with his acquaintance or whoever over the beer. I don't know if they were watching sports or what they were doing, but and I really appreciated how he separated how people identified from their behavior and explored that in a lot of different levels with the person, and that conversation was really helpful to me, and just sexual acts and how, you know, and what context they're performed in, and, you know, well, is this sinful, and is this sinful? And I thought that was a really powerful conversation, so.
I know that Colby felt like he had to go through all these different passages in the Bible, but when he gets to the very end of the book, it finally gets to where we have been for all, you know. In the UCC, we learned a long time ago, once you realize that everyone is a child of God, nothing else matters. You think of people in history. Hitler, he was a professed Christian. Churchill was not. So everyone is a child of God.
I want to go back to Julie. I don't know if this would be helpful, but you may have read it, The Heart of Christianity by Micah Borg. He talks about the earlier paradigm and the emerging paradigm. And the emerging paradigm talks about Scripture not as inerrant and infallible, but as metaphorical and historical, and it's a pretty awesome book in my head right now that relates to what your question was. Going once.
Any other last thoughts about this book?
One of the things that I've been wondering is perhaps Colby Martin is setting a new attitude and approach for conservative theologians. One of the things I did in preparation for today, I looked up N.T. Wright's commentary on the Klauber passage, and he just skips it. He doesn't even talk about it. He found other things to talk about. And
was it the Romans?
Yes, Romans 1, 26-27. And I thought, how can you do that? And I thought, well, but he wrote this, what, Kate, 10, 15 years ago probably, different times from today. Thank you. different, yeah. I just imagine I'm having a beer. There we go. Yeah. So I'm wondering, and Kate, perhaps you have some thoughts on this. Perhaps the future is a good one for conservative theologians, in the sense that perhaps some of them will come around. Maybe N.T. Wright might write it a little differently today. I don't know.
I mean, I wouldn't even say that N.T. Wright is all that conservative, but at the same time, I think there's a couple things happening. One, I do think that some have come around. So there's, back in like the early 2000s and maybe starting in the late 90s, there's what was referred to as the emerging church. And this was a lot of evangelicals who were discovering certain things that mainliners had known for a long time. And then we all kind of came to be in this conversation together. And some of that was as simple as like the liturgical calendar and how sometimes rhythm is beneficial. But like some of it also is the attitudes changing around queer and LGBTQ interpretation of the interpretation of these texts. So some people have come around. I sort of feel like, in part, we're in that cyclical piece of history where, because people are coming around, now we're starting to see the backlash of that. Yeah. So it's like people are becoming more and more entrenched. And at some point, I feel like we'll come back around again and maybe get even further around the circle, if you will. Just one other thought on my part. Well, two thoughts, and this is all theological and scriptural. One, none of these texts actually refer to people in loving relationships, which I think Colby addresses in the book. And so that's the first element that we need to consider when we are reading these, is even if the Romans text is not like a proof text argument piece that Paul is just using, even if he really does mean this, it probably is not speaking to any of the kind of relationships that queer people are engaged in today. And And so there's that. The other thing is, in my mind, this is how I got there first, and I think it kind of goes with Jim's comment about everyone being a child of God. Jesus said, and I'd have to go look at where this is because it's in one of the Gospels, but he said, whatever you bind on earth, I will bind in heaven. And the you, by the way, is plural here in both of these. And whatever you loose on earth, I will loose in heaven. And essentially what this means is whatever you hold as sort of the law will be bound in heaven. And he means you, like the church. This is not like a you singular, oh, I can just decide this. Like we have to decide this together. But then whatever you loose. And so essentially whatever has previously been law, if you decide it no longer is applicable, it will be loosed in heaven. And so for me, I'm sort of like, well, I mean, one, I agree with Colby on all of these texts. And even if we are wrong, Jesus said, whatever we loose, like if it has no more meaning for us as a people, if it's not helpful for loving each other and loving God, then we can loose it. And it will be in heaven. Holly has a comment. Doug has a comment.
Oh, I was just going to jump in and say that in Acts, which we're studying in Bible study right now, they're going through a real tough time because Paul is saying we need to welcome the Gentiles, even if they're not going to get circumcised. So it was a tough battle. It wasn't
Well, and
easy.
Peter, too. Peter was the big
And
proponent.
Peter had the dream, yeah.
Holly and then Doug.
So this is on a completely non-biblical rant. For those of you who have not read this book, it's a really good read, and it's got so much humor in it, and it's so relatable. I'm finding Colby's journey just fascinating, and the way he approaches it so interesting, and he seems like such a fun guy. And I think that speaks very highly for the book. I would recommend it to anybody who hasn't read it, and in a secular perspective even.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask one question of Ron here. In item number 1, where he says this topic is so important for LGBTQ people, especially children. This is becoming a rather controversial thing in our country now about children indoctrination, et cetera, et cetera. When you made that comment, were you speaking from personal experience in terms of your feelings and your experiences as a child?
Yeah, it comes from there because it was so hard for me to figure out who I was. I knew I was different, but I didn't know what it was, or maybe I did. If someone had really pushed it on me, I could have figured it out. But I put it in the back of my brain, locked it up, and it wasn't until, I guess, college where I was very much, I was good at wrestling, and so I was intramural wrestling, always went to the finals, and my fraternity loved it because we got a lot of points. But my senior year, I started realizing, I think I know what it is that's different about me. And so I no longer wrestled. Just little things like that. And then when I got out of college, my minister kept on saying, why aren't you dating? And I was like, I'm studying to be an actuary, so I'm taking all these actuarial exams. And then when I passed the 10th and last actuarial exam, he said, okay, now why aren't you dating? And I was like, this is really a scary question. I can't deal with it. It was so hard, and faith, my religion was so important to me that I guess I knew in the back of my head there's a lot of people that are pretty negative about this, especially back in the 70s. You weren't, newspapers weren't allowed to even mention the word homosexual in the newspaper or gay. You just didn't talk about it, and if it was talked about, like in the pulpit, it was negative, And the medical profession, if you go back to the early 70s, they thought you were sick. And, and you could be arrested for, if police came into your house for something wrong and they found out you were in bed with someone of the same gender, they could arrest you. So the legal profession, the medical profession what's the third one? The law, thank you, was all pretty negative until in the 70s it started changing, and then marriage equality really made a difference. So maybe it's a little better now, but it is so scary to grow up thinking maybe you're gay. And so just people, thank you for coming to this, reading the book and talking about this. And because if you talk about it, it'll help people. And it's better now, I guess, not so much for transgender people and kids, or, you know, it's tough. So thank you for coming here and talking about this.
Hello. I just wanted to say I am definitely interested in reading this book, and I may try, definitely interested now in reading this book. I'd heard about this guy in the news, and I'm interested to know he'll be here. I'm an occasional participant or a member here, so thank you very much for being so welcoming. And Ron, I'm really happy I came today. Okay, but I wanted to say a couple things. So I have children in their 30s, and one's almost 30, and also I taught constitutional law at UNC to people in their late teens, early 20s about 10, 15 years ago. And so there's really a generational change. I don't know your name, but the one who said that you were wanting to understand like how they got where they are and what gender they were, that feels like it's natural for people our age. And even now, even younger people have these gender reveal parties. Like, we need to know, don't we? We feel like we need to. So it's really different, but it feels like progress. And when I taught this con law class, one of the things we taught was the case in the U.S. Supreme Court about the Colorado Amendment that we passed here in 1992, protecting people from discrimination on this basis. And I was so surprised in Greeley how this conservative area had all these kids who didn't seem to care that much about what other people did with their lives. Like, they were much more tolerant on this issue, I felt. And I thought it was a genuine change. It feels like progress. I also wonder if it does tie into the thing that Jesus talked about judge not. Wow, when you think about it, every time you see somebody, are you judging? Oh, what if they're a man? What if it's a man or a woman? I mean, I can't help it. When you see somebody who's in the middle, I wonder. And I feel like it's like, okay, that's the log in your own eye. Who cares? It's their life, right? I don't know. It feels like progress. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to Ron, because he had already read this book and had been interested in hearing Colby, and I think actually had heard Colby when he came to the church that he was at in D.C. or in the D.C. area, Rehoboth, wherever, Delaware, it's all that same area. I mean, well, I lived there. One would think that I would know better. But anyway, so I want to thank him because he spurred Colby coming, which then spurred us reading this book. And so, I mean, even though I think most of us, if not all of us, are already on this page, having some understanding of how to talk about these texts, maybe with others who are not, is super helpful. His whole thing about, like, it is clunky for me as a cisgender white dude to be doing this work, but I think that in part that is our job. You know, I mean, Ron doesn't need to have any more work done or be the one doing the work because he's gay. Instead, it's up to us who are cisgender straight people to really be doing the heavy lifting, because we're the folks who have the ability to talk to others and be like, that's not where I'm at. And so it's sort of like, if you need some talking points, this book is helpful. And I look forward to hearing what Colby has to say to us in 2 weeks. And so yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. This was great.